In June of 1989, the Stoltzfus family vanished from their quiet farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Jacob, his wife Sarah, and their 2 young children were there one moment and gone the next. For 10 long years, their disappearance was a profound mystery, a ghost story whispered in the devout, tight-knit Amish community they called home. The case was a void, an empty space where a family used to be. Then, in 1999, a construction crew made a shocking discovery that finally revealed the horrifying truth. What they found was not just a clue, but the final, terrible resting place of the entire family, in the one place no one ever thought to look. And the story it told was darker than anyone could have ever imagined. The Stoltzfus family was the bedrock of their community. Jacob, a man in his early 40s, was known for his strong hands and quiet spirit. He was a master carpenter whose work was both functional and beautiful, a reflection of the Amish principle of finding God in simple, honest labor. His greatest pride beyond his faith was his family. He wasn't a man of many words, but his love was evident in his actions. The sturdy fence he built to keep his children safe, the gentle way he handled the family's horse, and the intricate cradle he was finishing for a niece's expected baby. He was a man of routine and principle, who believed that a life of hard work, prayer, and family was the only life worth living. His ambition wasn't to build an empire, but to build a home filled with love and faith. Sarah, his wife, was the heart of that home. Her presence was a warm and constant light. Her days were a blur of purposeful activity, from tending her sprawling vegetable garden to quilting intricate patterns that told stories without words. She was known for her generosity, always ready with a jar of canned peaches or a loaf of fresh bread for a neighbor in need. She was teaching her daughter, 10-year-old Hannah, the art of quilting, just as her own mother had taught her. Hannah was a bright, curious girl with her mother's smile and her father's thoughtful eyes. She loved reading the worn books in the family's collection and helping her mother in the garden. Her little brother, 7-year-old Samuel, was a bundle of energy, always trailing after his father in the barn, his pockets full of interesting stones and stray feathers. He wanted to be a farmer just like his dad. Their life was a tapestry woven from threads of tradition, faith, and deep familial love. They lived simply, without electricity or modern technology, their world illuminated by gas lamps and the strength of their bonds. They attended community gatherings, shared Sunday meals with relatives, and marked the seasons not by the calendar on the wall, but by the cycles of planting and harvest. Their life was what they had prayed for. It was peaceful, it was predictable, and it was complete. What they had to live for was everything to them, and its sudden interruption would leave a wound in their community that would fester for a decade. The last day of the Stoltzfus family's life began like any other. The sun rose over the rolling green hills of Lancaster County, and Jacob was already in the barn, the rhythmic sounds of milking echoing in the pre-dawn quiet. Sarah was in the kitchen, stoking the wood stove to prepare breakfast. The smell of frying scrapple and fresh coffee filled the small, tidy farmhouse. After a simple meal and morning prayers, the family began their daily chores. Jacob and Samuel headed out to the fields to mend a stretch of fence, while Sarah and Hannah worked in the garden, pulling weeds from around the burgeoning tomato plants. It was a typical early summer day, warm and peaceful, but beneath the surface of this idyllic routine, a subtle tension had been growing. A non-Amish neighbor, an Englishman named Carl Jennings, whose property bordered theirs, had become increasingly persistent. For months, he had been making offers to buy a portion of the Stoltzfus land. He spoke of its potential, a word that meant little to Jacob, who saw the land not as a commodity, but as a God-given trust. Jacob had politely but firmly refused each offer. Jennings, however, was not a man who took no for an answer. He was seen more frequently near their property line, his gaze lingering on their farm, with an intensity that unsettled Sarah. She had mentioned to her sister that his smile never seemed to reach his eyes. That afternoon, the family came together for lunch. Afterward, Jacob returned to his workshop to put the finishing touches on the cradle he was building. The smooth, curved rockers were nearly perfect. Samuel played nearby with a small wooden horse his father had carved for him. Sarah and Hannah sat on the porch, working on a quilt, their needles making soft, rhythmic clicks. This was the last image anyone had of them. A family bathed in the soft afternoon light, living their life as they always had. As evening approached, something shifted. A neighbor driving past noticed Jennings's pickup truck parked near the edge of the Stoltzfus property, which was unusual. Later that evening, Sarah's sister tried to call. Their community had a shared phone line and a small shanty for emergencies, but there was no answer. She assumed they were busy and thought little of it. But inside the Stoltzfus home, a silent tragedy was unfolding. A fatal mistake had been made not by the family, but against them. The half-sanded cradle sat in the workshop, waiting for a final coat of oil. The quilt on the porch lay unfinished, a needle still threaded through the fabric. The normal sounds of a family settling in for the night, laughter, prayers, the closing of doors, were replaced by an unnatural silence. What happened in those final hours would remain a mystery for years, a dark secret swallowed by the placid landscape. The next day was Sunday, a day of rest and worship. When the Stoltzfus family failed to appear for the community service, a quiet murmur of concern spread among the congregation. They were never absent. After the service, Sarah's brother Daniel decided to drive his buggy over to their farm to check on them. He expected to find a simple explanation. Perhaps one of the children was ill. As he turned down the long gravel lane leading to the farmhouse, a sense of unease settled over him. The farm was too quiet. The family's horse, a gentle giant named Goliath, was still in the barn, nickering nervously. He hadn't been fed. Daniel walked to the house and knocked on the back door. No answer. He turned the knob and found it unlocked. He stepped inside. The scene was chillingly normal, yet profoundly wrong. The kitchen table was set for 4 people, but the food sat untouched. A pitcher of iced tea, beaded with condensation, was in the center of the table. It was as if the family had been about to sit down for dinner and had simply vanished into thin air. Daniel called out their names. Jacob, Sarah? Only silence answered him. He walked through the small house. Everything was in its place. The beds were made. Clothes were neatly folded in the drawers. In the workshop, the unfinished cradle sat on the bench, a silent testament to a future that would never arrive. Panic began to claw at Daniel's throat. He ran back outside, scanning the fields, the woods, shouting their names until his voice was raw. There was no sign of a struggle. The family's buggy was in the barn, their cash savings, a significant amount they kept in a ceramic jar in the pantry, was gone. This detail suggested a robbery, but it didn't feel right. No Amish family would abandon their home, their animals, their lives, over stolen money. As he made one last frantic check around the barn, he noticed something out of place near the back door. A single muddy boot print. It was large, with a deep tread, clearly not the simple plain footwear worn by anyone in his community. It was an English boot print. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was beyond wrong. This was a violation. Shaking, Daniel hurried to the community phone shanty and made a call he never thought he would have to make. The 911 dispatcher on the other end struggled to understand him. "They're gone," Daniel repeated, his voice strained. "The whole family, the Stoltzfus family, they're just gone. Nothing is touched. The food is on the table. It's like they just evaporated." The disappearance was now official, leaving behind only questions and a deep, cold dread. The investigation began immediately, spearheaded by the Pennsylvania State Police. But from the very start, it was plagued by a series of critical failures and misunderstandings. The investigators, accustomed to a world of fingerprints, forensics, and traceable digital footprints, found themselves in an alien environment. The Stoltzfus home offered few modern clues. There were no phone records to check, no credit card statements to trace. The primary clue, the missing cash, led them down a logical but ultimately flawed path. The official theory quickly became that the family had been victims of a robbery that had either gone wrong, forcing them to flee, or that they had willingly run away. The idea that a devout Amish family would abandon their faith and community was preposterous to those who knew them, but to the outside investigators, it was a plausible scenario. This cultural chasm proved to be the investigation's greatest obstacle. The Amish community, wary and distrustful of the English world, retreated into itself. They answered the troopers' questions with quiet, clipped responses, their grief and fear masked by a stoic demeanor that the police mistook for uncooperativeness. They couldn't or wouldn't explained the intricate social fabric that made the runaway theory impossible. This communication breakdown created a fog of confusion that the real perpetrator exploited perfectly. Carl Jennings, the neighbor, was interviewed as a matter of routine. He presented himself as a concerned friend, offering a critical piece of misdirection. He told investigators he had seen a beat-up, unfamiliar sedan speeding away from the direction of the Stoltzfus farm late on the night of the disappearance. This fabricated sighting sent the police on a statewide hunt for a phantom vehicle, wasting precious time and resources. Search parties were organized. Hundreds of volunteers, both Amish and English, combed the surrounding woods, fields, and creeks. They searched for miles in every direction, their bright orange vests a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the countryside. K-9 units were brought in, but the scent trail went cold at the edge of the property line. They searched barns, sheds, and abandoned wells on neighboring farms. They searched everywhere a person could think to look. But the search was focused outward, on the assumption that the family had been taken away or had fled. No one considered looking down. No one thought to question the solid, century-old wooden floor of the Stoltzfus barn. It seemed impossible. As days turned into weeks, the family's frustration curdled into despair. Daniel watched as the police chased the false lead of the mystery car, feeling a growing sense of helplessness. The official search, for all its manpower and machinery, was failing. The truth was right there, just feet from where the investigation began, buried under layers of dirt, wood, and a brilliantly executed lie. The official search wound down, the news crews packed up, and a heavy silence settled back over the farm. The case of the vanished Stoltzfus family went cold. For 10 years the mystery lingered, a wound that refused to heal. The farm itself became a grim landmark, a place frozen in time. The fields grew wild. The paint on the house began to peel. The unfinished cradle in the workshop gathered a thick coat of dust, a monument to a life interrupted. For the Stoltzfus family's relatives and their community, the years were a period of suspended grief. Without a body, without answers, there could be no closure. How do you mourn people who are simply gone? Sarah's brother Daniel aged a lifetime in that decade. The hope he had clung to in the early days slowly eroded, replaced by a hollow ache of uncertainty. Every time an unidentified body was found in a neighboring state, a jolt of fear and hope would run through him. But it was never them. The not knowing was a unique form of torture, a constant low-grade fever of the soul. In the wider community of Lancaster County, the story morphed into a piece of dark folklore. It became a ghost story told around campfires, a cautionary tale for children who wandered too far from home. Local teenagers would dare each other to sneak onto the vanished farm at night, hoping for a thrill, for a glimpse of the ghosts that surely haunted the property. The story took on a life of its own, detached from the real, breathing family that had been lost. The narrative was simple and terrifying. A family had been sitting down to dinner, and then they were erased from the face of the earth. The official file on the case was relegated to a dusty box in an evidence locker, labeled Stoltzfus, Cold Case. The leads had dried up. The phantom car was never found. The theory of a runaway family, while never officially discounted, seemed less likely with each passing year. The deep-seated feeling of hopelessness became permanent. The disappearance was accepted as one of those terrible, unsolvable mysteries, a permanent scar on the tranquil landscape of Amish country. The truth, it seemed, was buried forever. In the summer of 1999, 10 years after the family vanished, the dormant case was jolted back to life by a completely unrelated catalyst. The Stoltzfus farm, having sat in a state of legal limbo for a decade, was finally sold by the extended family. The new owner was a developer who saw not a memorial to a lost family, but an opportunity. He had plans to subdivide the land and build modern homes, a plan that necessitated the demolition of the old, dilapidated structures, including the main barn. On a hot August morning, a demolition crew arrived. A heavy bulldozer rumbled onto the property, its powerful engine shattering the decade of silence. As the machine began its work on the barn, pushing against the old wooden walls, something unexpected happened. With a groan of splintering timber, a large section of the main floor of the barn suddenly gave way. The bulldozer's heavy steel tracks broke through the thick floorboards, plunging several feet into the ground below. The operator, a man named Dave, cut the engine. He peered into the chasm that had just opened up. It wasn't just dirt and foundation stones. It was a space. A dark, hollow void that had no business being there. It looked like a crudely dug cellar, a secret basement hidden beneath the main structure. A chill ran down his spine despite the summer heat. He radioed his foreman, and the foreman called the police. The call was logged as a routine report of an unusual discovery on a construction site. It was assigned to a young, sharp state police detective named Miller. Miller was new to the region, but was vaguely familiar with the local legend of the vanished farm. As he drove to the site, he felt a flicker of professional curiosity. But when he arrived and saw the gaping hole in the barn floor, that flicker ignited into a blaze of adrenaline. This was not a sinkhole, this was not a forgotten root cellar. This was deliberate, this was hidden. He immediately secured the scene, ordering the demolition crew to halt all work. In that moment, the narrative of the Stoltzfus family shifted irrevocably. A decade of cold, hopeless mystery had just been cracked open by a twist of fate and the weight of a bulldozer. The truth was about to be unearthed. The discovery of the hidden cellar transformed the vanished farm from a local legend into an active crime scene. Detective Miller coordinated a full-scale forensic excavation. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape, and a white tent was erected over the gaping hole in the barn, shielding it from view. Under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, a team of forensic archaeologists began the painstaking process of digging. They worked slowly, meticulously, removing the earth layer by layer with brushes and trowels. It didn't take long. Less than 2 feet down, a brush scraped against something hard. It was bone. The digging became even more delicate. Soon, an entire human skeleton was partially uncovered, then another, and finally a fourth, much smaller one. The team had found 4 bodies, confirming the darkest fears that had haunted the community for a decade. The remains were carefully exhumed and transported to the medical examiner's office. Alongside the skeletons, the team found heartbreaking remnants of the family's life. A woman's simple, crushed bonnet, the corroded metal clips of a man's suspenders, a small, hand-carved wooden horse clutched in the skeletal fingers of a child. There was no longer any doubt. Dental records provided a swift and positive identification. Jacob, Sarah, Hannah, and Samuel Stoltzfus. The autopsy revealed the cause of death was not a mystery. All 4 had suffered massive, catastrophic, blunt force trauma to the head. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was a brutal, violent murder. The discovery of the bodies in a purpose-built grave directly beneath their own barn completely upended the original investigation. The focus was no longer on a phantom car or a runaway family. The killer was someone who knew the farm, who had the time and access to dig a grave and conceal it perfectly. Miller pulled the original cold case file, a thick, dusty tome of dead ends. He reread every witness statement, every scrap of paper, and then he saw it. The statement from the helpful neighbor, Carl Jennings. Jennings had claimed to be home all night, but another neighbor's statement, initially dismissed as unimportant, mentioned that Jennings's truck had been gone for several hours in the middle of that same night. It was a small inconsistency, but now it was everything. Miller knew this was the thread. He discovered that Jennings had sold his property and moved to Florida a few years after the disappearance. Within hours, Miller was on a plane. He found Carl Jennings living in a small retirement community, an unassuming old man with watery blue eyes. Miller didn't mince words. He laid out the new evidence on the coffee table, photos of the excavated cellar, of the 4 skeletons, of the little wooden horse. He pointed out the discrepancy in his original statement. Jennings's friendly facade began to crack. His hands trembled. The friendly neighbor persona dissolved, revealing the monster that had hidden beneath it for 10 years. Under the weight of the undeniable truth and Miller's relentless questioning, the old man crumbled. The confession came in a torrent of words, a decade of buried guilt and evil pouring out into the sterile Florida air. Carl Jennings's confession laid the entire sordid truth bare. The motive was not passion or personal hatred, but pure, cold-blooded greed. Jennings, a small-time land speculator, had learned through a contact in the energy sector that the ground beneath the rolling hills of Lancaster County, specifically under the Stoltzfus farm, held a rich deposit of shale gas. In 1989, this was not yet common knowledge, but he knew it would one day be worth millions. He saw the Stoltzfus family not as neighbors, but as obstacles standing between him and a fortune. He had spent the better part of a year trying to convince Jacob to sell, using vague terms like development and opportunity. But Jacob, a man whose wealth was measured in faith and family, not dollars, politely and consistently refused. He had no interest in selling the land his family had worked for generations. Jennings' frustration grew into obsession. He hatched a plan. He began digging the pit under their barn at night, a few hours at a time over several weeks. His initial plan, he claimed, was not to kill them but to stage a kidnapping, to scare them into signing over the deed to the land. On that final evening, he went to the farm to confront Jacob one last time. He brought a tire iron with him, hidden under his jacket. When Jacob once again refused to sell, Jennings snapped. All his frustration and greed erupted in a moment of savage violence. He struck Jacob down. When Sarah and the children ran from the house, drawn by the noise, his panic took over. He couldn't have witnesses. He murdered them all one by one. The kidnapping plan morphed into a horrific cover-up. He dragged the 4 bodies into the pre-dug pit. He worked through the night, covering them with dirt and meticulously replacing the heavy floorboards of the barn, scattering hay to hide his work. To create a misdirection, he took the family's cash savings from the pantry to create the illusion of a robbery. The final piece of his plan was to lie to the police, planting the seed of the phantom car, to send them on a wild goose chase away from the farm, away from him. It had worked perfectly. For 10 years he lived with his secret, watching the case go cold, before finally selling his own land and moving away, confident he had committed the perfect crime. Now, at the end of his life, that crime had been unearthed. Carl Jennings was arrested and extradited to Pennsylvania, where he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The news of the arrest and the gruesome truth behind the disappearance sent a profound shockwave through the quiet community, finally answering the question of what happened, but replacing it with the horrifying reality of why. The resolution of the mystery brought not celebration, but a wave of profound and complicated sorrow. The focus of the story returned to the people who had suffered the most from the decade of uncertainty. Sarah's brother, Daniel, was now a stooped, gray-haired man, his face a roadmap of his 10-year vigil. Detective Miller personally drove him to the farm, a place he hadn't set foot on since the initial search. Standing there, looking at the yellow tape and the excavated earth where his family had lain for so long, the finality of it washed over him. The torture of not knowing was over, but it was replaced by the concrete, soul-crushing knowledge of their terrifying final moments. The relief he had prayed for was inextricably mixed with an agony he could have never prepared for. The Amish community, which had carried the ghost of the Stoltzfus family for a decade, came together to reclaim their own. They organized a funeral. Thousands of people, Amish and English alike, lined the country roads as 4 simple pine coffins were carried by horse-drawn hearse to the local cemetery. It was a day of deep collective grief, but also of a quiet, powerful closure. They could finally mourn. They could finally lay their lost members to rest according to their traditions. At the graveside, Daniel wept openly, tears not just for the family he had lost, but for the 10 stolen years of hope and despair. The community surrounded him, their silent, stoic presence a pillar of support. The ghosts of the vanished farm were finally at peace, the question of their whereabouts answered. For the survivors, the journey was far from over, but the first, most important step, bringing them home, was complete. The raw emotion of that day provided a somber human catharsis to a story that had for so long been only a chilling, impersonal mystery. The story of the Stoltzfus family transcended the details of a single, horrific crime. It became a powerful and tragic parable about the collision of 2 vastly different Americas. On one side was the quiet, faith-based world of the Amish, a world that valued community, simplicity, and a spiritual connection to the land. On the other was the rapacious materialist greed of the modern world, personified by Carl Jennings. for whom that same land was nothing more than a commodity to be exploited for profit. The case served as a brutal illustration of the depths of human evil, showing how a simple desire for wealth could fester into a monstrous act that annihilated an entire family. But it was also a testament to the stubborn persistence of truth. For a decade, a lie was powerful enough to create a legend and misdirect an entire investigation. But a lie cannot change what is real. The truth was always there, waiting in the earth, until a chance event brought it into the light. The legacy of the case spurred tangible change. Law enforcement agencies in Pennsylvania and beyond reevaluated their procedures for interacting with culturally isolated communities. New protocols were established, creating liaisons specifically trained to bridge the gap between modern police work and the traditions of groups like the Amish, ensuring that a communication breakdown like the one that hampered the initial Stoltzfus investigation would not happen again. The vanished farm is gone now, replaced by new homes. But the story remains a permanent and chilling reminder that the greatest dangers often hide behind the most ordinary of faces. A peaceful family, a hidden fortune beneath their feet, and a terrible secret buried for a decade in the one place they should have been safe. The Stoltzfus story is a devastating reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the neighbors we believe we know, smiling at us over the fence. If this story of a family's stolen life and a long overdue justice moved you, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing for more true crime mysteries that demand to be told. The official story is that Carl Jennings acted alone, driven by his own greed. But some have always wondered if a crime this elaborate required help. Tell us in the comments what you believe really happened on that quiet farm in 1989.